Welcome. I'm Bob Mover, and I'd like to welcome you all to On the Real Side. Today's illustrious guest, I'm so happy to have him. Seems like we actually started out in the world together, uh, and all this time has passed. It's so funny to have him here, but he's certainly carved his niche in the history of jazz music. And Mr. Adam Nussbaum is with us today.
Nice to be with you, Bob, and better to be seen than viewed.
As very well put. Here we are. We're both upright.
Amen, baby. Staying on this side of the grass.
That's right. And Hal Galper said something funny to me about that too. He said, "Oh, good, you're on my still alive list."
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think of when I think I first played with you in 75 or 76.
Yes, at with Albert Daly was the way I met you, as I recall. Was we were both Albert had these Sunday afternoon sessions at Folk City.
I remember them well. What a fantastic opportunity for me, and I learned so much to play with such a masterful musician.
Well, I can say the same, and then it's kind of a shame that Albert Daly has not gotten the recognition, even, post in his afterlife, or whatever you want to call it, that he deserved, because he was really he was something. And that trio, I mean, well, what would happen? I remember those Sundays well, because Tom Harrell and I had worked a gig with Vinnie Burke a night, the night before the first time I went to Folk City. And Saturday night, Albert didn't say anything to us. On the ride there, we drove to New Jersey. The gig was in Madison, New Jersey or something. And we drove there and we drove back. And Albert was very quiet. We were listening to Charlie Parker and stuff. And he grunted a couple of things. And Tom and I spent the night. Tom stayed over at my house that night. I cooked some dinner and we would hang and practice and stuff. And then we were sitting there. Do you think he liked us? Did he say, he didn't say anything, he didn't I think he liked us, we're babbling about that. So 11 o'clock, about noon, the phone rang, and it's Albert on the phone. He had asked for our numbers. I said, that's a good sign, and he gave us his, but that was a routine. Everybody did that in those days, right? You took numbers, and so the phone rings, and it's Albert, and he says, I'm playing in Folk City this afternoon. And I just thought I'd like to invite you and Tom over and start the day with some really good music. And so Tom couldn't do it because he had a rehearsal with Bob Berg that afternoon, so he didn't make it. But I went over, and that was where I met you for the first time.
Yeah.
You, Dennis Irwin, who I knew before, I'd known. That was Albert's trio.
I have cassettes, and you're probably on some. I have some cassettes from Folk City.
Wow, well, I would love to hear some of that, because
I have to digitize stuff, My dog is rolling around here on the floor. Hey, Cosby.
My dog does the same thing. And when I tell her, I have to tell her she's beautiful. I have to go, ooh, you're so pretty.
That's Cosmo. He's very handsome.
Yes, right. You see, and Layla, I will show you her. She won't let me hold her. She doesn't like that. She's a Lhasa Apso, and she's very particular about who and when and what and all these things. She's a real lady, and but so you and Albert and Dennis Irwin, our other great buddy, was
it's fascinating because when I played with Albert, Carter Jefferson was also involved, and we had consecutive birthdays. Dennis was November 28th, I was November 29th, and Carter was November 30th.
Yeah, that's
and the crazy thing is I'm the only one still here.
Yeah, I have a few situations like that too, where I was thinking
this is getting more and more prevalent as we've hit this time in life,
Yeah.
And Albert, he's gone 40 years now.
Yes, he is. As a matter of fact, I had just moved to Canada to have my first daughter, Emily, and I remembered that Albert called me. He says, "What are you doing there? Why you leave New York?" I said, "Well, I need some peace and quiet. I'm going to have a child. This may not happen very often in my life." And I took a gig at a university in Montreal. It's nice. It's a place to relax, from the intensity in New York.
City.
Get off the road, not do that stuff for a minute. And he's like, "Well, you got to come back." It was like that. You got to come back.
I mean, he was such a giving individual, and I just, he's one of the people that I have so much gratitude for. I was usually always the young guy. I was always the kid, and it was so great for me to play with masterful musicians that were much better than me and had so much more experience. And I just being in their presence and playing with them just helped me up my game. And yeah, man, I think actually I played on two tunes on one of his records, and the producer of the record didn't. He thought I was too much of a rookie. So the second day they called Charlie Persip to come in, and I didn't mind because Charlie was one of my teachers. And I remember finally Charlie got double scale and I got no scale.
that's that's how those things worked in those days.
Welcome to the music business, which is, I think, an oxymoron if there ever was one.
Yes. Oh, well. One has to remember. I think it was Ornette that said it. Somebody said it, that the music business is not the business of music.
No.
And
But I didn't really care. I mean, I was just, in hindsight, when I think of so many of the great musicians I got to play with when I was younger, I should have been paying them for
I felt like that too. Like, for me, it was, I was also the kid, and I had you in my band. We did Boomers every Tuesday.
That was the first time I played Boomers was with you, Calvin Hill, and Jeff Stout and James Williams came down from Berkeley. I remember this clear as a bell. And I had gone to Boomers many times, but this was my first time to play there. And that was with you, for which I'm very glad it happened. And I remember this like yesterday. I'm playing there, I'm excited, and I see Art Blakey come in, and I knew Boo from the scene. And
Right, we
Boo
all did.
walking by because he's going back to the head in the back, and he looks up at me and he goes, "You're playing your ass off." And thank God he said that, because 3 minutes later, Mingus and Sonny Rollins walked in the club. And if Art hadn't said that to me, I probably would have just fallen off the drum chair in just complete terror. But, he gave me that encouragement, and he was so giving as well. I
Oh, he
mean,
was. Yeah.
the community of the elders and my mentors were so supportive. And
Absolutely. I was going through the same thing. Sonny came because we were friends, and I had talked to him on the phone, and he had kept saying, "Well, some night I'm going to come down and hear you." And I'm thinking, yeah,
yeah, Bob, you're really doing it, man.
yeah, And I
Have
said,
you
"There he is,"
spoken to him
and he walked
recently?
in with me. Now the other thing is about that evening. I remember it too because Boo was there. Blakey, for those of you who don't know, and that was the night that actually Albert Daly couldn't do the gig. He was our pianist, and he did that gig regularly. You did that a couple times with Albert afterwards too. There was that gig because Albert called me. I was in Boston playing with James at a place called the Rise Club in Cambridge, and I was like the headliner, and James was the house band, and James was and Akita Tana was playing drums. Akita Tana. So
Canatuna.
Canatuna. That's like a John Abercrombie, right? He had other names for everybody. George Morose. But anyway, So I was in Boston, and dear sweet Albert calls me and says, I'm not going to make Tuesday because I'm going out with Stan Getz. I said, oh, okay. Well, I understand. You'll give up your $25, whatever it was for Tuesday, and go on the road and make some money and then play with Getz. I understand. Don't worry about it. So James was on this gig, and I said, hey, James, you want to come down to New York and play Tuesday with me? I mean, it'll just about pay your train fare. But I mean, that's, the gig is there if you want to do it. And I said to Stout, I said, hey, if you want to come down, just maybe I can get a few bucks out of the club to get a trumpet player for that day. So they said, all right. And they came down, and James came down and made the gig. And that's when Boo walked in. And between sets, James came to me. He said, all right, Blake, he just hired me. And so
that's great. Yeah.
So that was how things worked. And, in those days, you'd be sitting there, and if you were there, you never knew who was going to hear you and where that might lead your career to be. The other thing too was like the money. Like when Chet Baker died, he owed me a few bucks, and it was like somewhere around. He would borrow hundreds and pay back 50s. That's what Chet liked to do. So somebody said,
quite common.
Quite common. So when Chet died, a friend of mine said, "You mean he died and he owed you almost $1,000? You never bothered him about it?" I said, "Well, I bothered him a little bit about it when I needed money. I'd say, Chet, I need some money,' and he'd say, I can't really give that to you now. And I'd say, that was our conversation. And then I think, well, he gave me. I worked all over the world because of this cat and made money all the time with him. And then in the end, he owes me $1,000. Think of what people paid to go to music school. I should have been paying him. Same idea.
I totally agree. I totally agree. The experience is worth more than the money, because, when you get to play with masters and people that are so much better than you, that's the best education there is. And I just feel like, I was able to catch that time where this was still very possible. I mean, I talk about this a lot with people now. Young people now, they grew up with DJs. They haven't grown up with live music.
Right.
And when we were young, any restaurant, bar, social event, there were bands. So as a youngster, I remember being 4, 5, 6 years old, hearing bands and watching and looking, and that's monkey see, monkey do.
Yeah, and before rents went way up, every Italian restaurant had a piano.
Yeah.
Had an acoustic piano, and usually a good piano player playing tunes while the people dined.
All the time, man. There was always live music. And for me, being in New York, I was living in New York from 1975 through 92. I was in the New York area. And rents were affordable.
Yeah, absolutely. People apartments.
The gigs pay the same, but what I was paying $280 a month for is now $2,500 a month, and the gigs are still paying the same. So it's impossible for the young musicians to be within the community the way it used to be. It's a whole other thing, man.
You know what else isn't stressed enough? What would happen with these gigs when you played with the elders, and maybe there was another cat close to your age on the band? The friendships that were fostered, not just the music. You'd learn all about music, of course, by just being there and playing with these great people, but the hang. I mean, the entourage, the idea of hanging out and learning about life.
Nothing like it, man. Invaluable to be part of the community. Invaluable experience.
Yeah, the friendships that were fostered that lasted, like you and I, we haven't really hung out a lot in the last 30 years, but it's like we were hanging out yesterday.
30, 40. I mean, a long time, man. I mean, I remember we were doing the gig that we also played at Sweet Basil.
Yeah.
With Masuo and Calvin Hill and Tom Harrell.
It might have been Bob Bodley.
It could have been Bob.
Remember Bob Bodley?
I remember Calvin also.
And Dennis did some of that, yeah.
I remember Bodley well. He unfortunately passed away.
He did. I know, quite young.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But
The whole thing, man, is just to try to keep moving and stay in the game.
Ron
My
McClure was also
goal,
offered it. Ron McClure was offered at Sweet Basil as well. He'd be mad at me if I don't mention him, but he was there.
well, McClure was one of the great gifts for me because a little after the time I played with you, I was in a quintet with Dave Liebman, with Terra Masahino, Scofield, and McClure. And for me, as a young drummer, to play with an experienced bass player like Ron was invaluable education for me.
Sure.
The
Yeah.
best thing for a young drummer is to play with an older bass player and vice versa. If you're a young, bass player, play with an experienced drummer. Because, I got to get that spittle a ding going with that ickety boom.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's, in fact, we can go through your discography as were, were saying earlier. If when you see that wall of CDs behind Adam there,
No,
I
no, that's what I listen to. That's the stuff I'm on back there.
oh, you exaggerated, you fool.
No,
No.
no. I said this one was that's my wall of shame.
I see. I had it confused, and I was
This
going, "Oh
oh no, I'm
my
not on that
gosh!"
many then. You kidding me?
I knew you'd been prolific, but I said,
I
"Wow."
like that. And thank goodness I have friends in the business that sent me a lot of that stuff. Because otherwise, you know,
Yeah,
I couldn't afford all that stuff.
yeah, that's like an art collection, Nussbaum collection, the Nussbaum archives,
Oy
But
vey Maria.
show the other side of the wall. This is what Adam has accumulated, which is quite an impressive body, literal
There's a
body of
few
work.
good ones in there.
And I want to go through some of them. We can talk about the people you did them with, because I
Okay.
mean, we've known a lot of those people in
Sure.
common, and we got a lot of. And the one thing with these people, these elders for the most part, and even our contemporaries, I mean, I would never trade the jazz life for anything because I have met so many fascinating, interesting people that were parts of this music. I can't think of anything where there would be more fascinating group of
I
characters.
just have, I pinch myself sometimes and I go, I am so grateful. And I may not be rich in my pocket, but I'm so rich in my soul from these experiences. And this is what means so much to me. And here's another great line from Art Blakey. He was like such a sage and like a shaman. He used
Oh
to
yeah,
say, I never saw the Brinks truck following the hearse.
I never.
And another one of his great lines that I love is, you don't want to play two hip because two hips make an ass.
Oh, I didn't. I
I
didn't
mean,
know that
these
one.
people,
Of,
man. I
of
mean,
course,
I'm
the
just,
famous one is if you're not appearing, you're disappearing. That's one of his great adages.
the punishment can fit the crime. I can make you, I can break you.
That's right. You know that story about Phil Woods with Billy Joel.
Yeah, yeah, I made you and I can break
I
you.
made you, I can break you. And that was anyway, like you grew up. Now you started out on piano as a child. You had piano lessons for 4 or 5 years or so.
5 years from the time I was 7 to 12, I studied with a wonderful woman who was a ex-student of Bartok's.
Really?
And
Wow.
she was tough but loving at the same time. And what was wonderful about her was besides just learning classical repertoire, she would bring her students together and we would have like little sessions.
Mhm.
So we learned how to listen. Maybe somebody would play the glockenspiel. I might play the drums. Somebody else might play triangle or cymbal or, So we learned how to listen. And
And you
so
learned the sense of community as well, which later
absolutely,
would be so important. Yeah. Go ahead,
absolutely.
please.
And my the first time I played a drum set, I was staying with my aunt and uncle, and my cousin Peter, who was 9 years older than me, he had a set of drums. So he was cool, you know. He's 14, he's the cool guy, he's got the drums, and he put on a stack of 45s. I watched him play, and I basically just sat down, and it was monkey see, monkey do.
Hmm.
And I didn't study the drums until I got to be about 13. I was already playing drums just from watching and listening and playing along with records on the bed and pillows and anything I could hit, you know.
Yeah. What was the? Do you remember the first music that you were attracted to? You know.
Well, the first records that I remembered that were captivating to me as a child, you know, you look at your parents' record collection, and my parents had a very diverse collection. And the records that I first listened to a lot were Leadbelly records.
Uh huh.
And they had classical, they had folk, they had blues, they had jazz, they had everything. But I mean, I had those records, man. I mean, one of them was him wearing overalls and a bandana.
I
The other
remember that photo. I mean,
was him with a three-piece suit and a 12-string guitar. And
yeah.
as a little boy, I listened to those records a lot, and I loved those. And I mean, I did a Lead Belly project a few
You have
years.
a project. I was just gonna say that. That was
So it's a complete full circle of what was my initial inspired music that inspired me as a kid.
for those of you who are watching this who don't know who Leadbelly was. He was a blues man named Huddy Ledbetter, and he is one of the originators of the blues. I mean,
Well,
as far,
blues folk and, you know, coming from field hollers and things like that, he didn't really gain any kind of notoriety until he was, you know, in his middle age. You know, he'd already been in and out of jail and had all different things going on. And but he was one of the first to make the migration up to the north and kind of get accepted by people. And he, you know, affected people like Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, a whole bunch of those.
so
And
tell us about your record, the Leadbelly Project. You know who's on it, and uh, give us a little.
basically, Leadbelly played 12-string guitar. And so I don't know anybody that plays 12 string. So I found two great cats that play 6-string, Steve Cardenas and Nate Radley. There's no bass in the group, and the wonderful saxophonist who I know named Ohad Talmor.
I know
I
Ed from Lee Konitz.
I done work with him along with Steve Swallow. That's how I first met him.
Uh huh.
Ohad's a wonderful musician, great musician, and he was kind of saying to me, "Man, look, you know, put something together, do something." And I was thinking, what could I do that really reflects to what was some of my initial inspiration? Because I've been hearing so much music in the past, you know, 5, 10 years, it sounds too much from the neck up. You
Yeah, that's a.
too much math, too much science, and you know, the blues is something visceral. And for me, it's like if you have great musicians, you don't need to give them anything complicated. Basically, if you give them something simple, then they can make something and do something with it. And what I love about this band is everybody plays well, but more than that, they really hear. And as time goes on, I realize the greatest musicians are the guys that hear the best.
Yeah.
Not
I would
just
say.
not just, you know, fluency on the instrument, but fluency with their ability to hear, react, and create something. And I'm more concerned with emotion and feeling than I am with velocity and acrobatics.
Well, I think that's what has attracted so many cats to your playing, because I even remember you I think when we met, you were about 18 and I was like 24. No, you were maybe 19
I was
and I was
19,
20.
20, yeah.
I was 23, something like that, 22,
I
23.
thought you were like 20 years older than me.
Well, but you know, but one of the things about you talking about listening, and I think that what's attracted so many people to your playing, and also the fact that it's, I wondered if something had to do with your early piano training and your understanding the whole music, where you, not just beating on something, but the way you would listen. I sensed that from that very early time that we played together, that you had something very special in the way that you would react. You would listen, and you would react in a way, and I think that's why you've been so
Well,
uh, so called for. I mean,
I
so many people wanted to
appreciate
play
that.
with
I
you.
mean, I definitely know that I came to the drums for music. I didn't come to music from the drums.
Good way to put it. Yeah.
And consequently, I mean, I didn't even know what rudiments were. I didn't know what any of that the language was, but I understood subject and I just tried to keep an open mind. I mean, I'm a musical erasist. I erase all the names and the labels. I just like honest music. And if I want to play something, I'm trying to play it, not play at it.
Yeah, I understand.
And I think that's something which has always kind of been guiding me along the way. I mean, there's a lot that I can't do, but I'm somehow able to try to get inside. I remember specifically another thing with Albert Daly. I remember when I first started doing those hits down at Folk City. I'm the little hungry kid. I'm hungry. I want the answer. I want the magic answer. And I
Yeah,
remember saying to Albert one time, "Hey man, what should I do? Man, what should I do?" I'm like, ugh. And he just looked at me, goes, "Just play the music." And I thought at that point he was just dismissing me. But what he said was absolutely true. What is the music telling you to play? And, the greatest teachers are the people that make you figure it out for yourself.
yeah. That's like I teach in a similar way, or I've taught myself, or I believe the elders that taught me the same lesson. That like our the music knows where it wants to go, and we just follow it there. We just kind of
The
and
people
then,
you play with are going to determine how that is interpreted. I mean, music on a sheet of paper is only information. It's not music, it's just information. The people you play it with are going to determine how it is. What style is it going to be interpreted in? And my job is to try to enable that to happen and help those people get to what they want to get to. And at the end of the day, I think it comes down to you have to gain the trust of the other musicians on the bandstand.
oh yes, it's very important
Yeah.
to
And
do
once
that.
that happens, then you can start to have some fun.
Right, right. But that trust thing is so important, and that also comes out to the friendship part of it too. You
Right.
trust each other off the bandstand.
Yeah.
There's a part of that goes into the music
Well,
that's
for the
unsaid,
most part,
unspoken.
there are exceptions. Yeah, I mean, you hear of cats and bands that were, cats and Dukes band that never talked to each other, but they got on the bandstand and they found kumbaya.
Oh
I've
yeah,
been,
well, I mean, I used to sit in with Roy Eldridge when I was a teenager, and they had Anita O'Day as a guest on the weekend with Roy, which was like Richie Kamuka and Dick Katz and Eddie Locke, and or
hey,
Mousy that plays
I
out.
got a, I got a live, I got a live recording of that band
Ah, well,
with,
wow, I got to hear
I
that
think
too.
it, I think it was at the Half Note or
At
something.
the
It was
half
like
note,
Dick
well,
Katz. Eddie Locke, Richie Kamuka played beautiful, man.
Richie was my
And
teacher.
Anita O'Day,
Yeah.
Anita O'Day was doing a gig.
Well, she would do the weekend. She'd come in on the weekend because it was that time. It was a 5-night-a-week gig, and you know, actually 6-night-a-week gig. There was like one night off. I believe Mondays were dark, and the rest of the week the band would come in, and then Fridays and Saturdays. But Anita and Roy hated each other. They couldn't stand each other, man. They would argue.
They had history because they played with Gene Krupa back in the day.
They had that history, and pity the man that asked about that history, whatever it was. They were talking to each other. They would swear with each other. They would call each other names, and as a friend of mine said, would shock a sailor. You know, and they would be arguing, and then it was time to hit, and Anita, hey Roy, and like let me off uptown, and you think that they were like the closest people in the world. They never said a word except that was not hostile to each other. It was very funny, but
Fantastic, man.
you know, but that was, you know, but those were those days where you had that. You see, you still experience the swing cats too, which is very important. That both of us were the tail end of that era where you could hear the Eddie Locks and the Bud Johnsons and you know Rich, you know, and Earl Father.
Doc Cheatham was still playing at Sweet Basil. You could go uptown. You could hear Brooks Kerr playing with Sonny Greer. You could go up to the West End and hear Papa Joe. I mean,
I subbed for a month for Russell Procope with Sonny Greer and Brooks Kerr.
Nice.
A whole every night with Sonny Greer was a trip, man. That was so funny. He was one of those most unforgettable characters, and he still could play.
They don't make him like ba 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 doo ba boop ba ba. Things ain't what they used to be, man.
Well, see, that's where the music wants to go. When you understand that it's going, do, then what? Bob. and that's the music telling you this is where I want to go.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, man. Wow.
So let's get into your career a little bit because you've had such a wonderful career. I want to thank you too, man. When we were in an airport once, we ran into each other and you introduced me to Niels Henning Orsted Peterson. And that's the only time I'd always wanted to play with him. And I played with most of the cats. Fortunately, thank God, many of the cats I wanted to play with in my life, I've gotten to do that with. But I never really got to play with it. He was a big idol of mine. Ooh. And I had a chance. We sat down while we were waiting for the planes were late or something. So I had about 45 minutes of a beautiful conversation with him. It felt like we'd known each other forever. He was a sweet, sweet man.
Absolutely.
And it was because of you, because I saw you at the airport and you were with him and you introduced us and then I abandoned you. I'm sorry to say, but we abandoned each other. But, you know, I ended up sitting with Niels Henning and having that wonderful, unforgettable moment with him. So
yeah, it was wonderful to play with this guy. I mean, there's people that are really kind of, God puts a little extra magic in certain people. You know, Buddy Rich was one. Louis Armstrong, Bird, Art Tatum, Niels Henning. They just got something. You could practice your whole life and you're not going to be like that. And what I loved about Niels Henning is he could play anything on the instrument, but he was first of all committed to being a bass player. When he had to play in the ensemble and provide the function of his instrument. And then when it was time to solo, it was like, you couldn't believe it. But he had enough sensibility to provide what was supposed to be as a bass player. I hear a lot of young guys now, they have so much ability, but they don't have the sensibility.
Yes, exactly. It reminds me of a story with Masuo, Yoshiaki Masuo, when he first was in the States, he hadn't been here very long, a couple of years, but his English was very halting and he was a little embarrassed because he's very articulate in Japanese and he's now very articulate in English. after all this time. And at first he wasn't. But there was a bass player we were playing with in a kind of pickup band on the road in Montreal, and we were traveling somewhere in Quebec, and I was trying to explain to the bass player that he would have maybe been a great saxophone player because his solos are very good and everything, but that there's a certain thing called time that has to be part of the bass. That this is what you're essentially here for. So Matsuo, who doesn't speak much English, says what Bob is trying to tell you is bass must play bass.
Or I always try to say to cats, I go, remember you are BASE of the band. Nobody else is in your frequency. And a band needs that to help balance out and give a foundation to the band.
Yeah. Well,
You got to have that. And it's just so necessary. I mean, if you want to do all that other stuff all the time, play a different instrument. But bass players, real bass players, they got to have a real commitment to the function of what it is, and to ideally be very selfless in regard to providing that.
yeah, I mean, another guy who reminded me of Niels in the same ilk of bass players. There are many great bass players who are all different from each other, but George Mraz was another one who was like as virtuosic as you would ever imagine. If he could play anything you want. In fact, first gig I played with George was in Boston when I was like 17, and George was like in his mid 20s, and he was we would get him. It was a little trio gig I had at a place called the Toga Lounge in Cambridge, and George would sometimes be our bass player. Calvin Hill was sometimes our bass player, and John Abercrombie played on electric bass sometimes when we couldn't find a bass player.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the drummer and I. But one night somebody said they came in to hear us, and they said, "Man, I caught that Cherokee you played, and first time I ever heard a bass play faster than a saxophone." Because if he wanted to.
George was exceptional. Just an amazing musician, great musician, and absolutely hilarious.
Oh, absolutely. The funniest guy. I mean, so funny, man. I mean, and that deadpan. This of it. I mean, like when he would, we played chess one time. He comes out before we even start the game. He does a sleight of hand trick. He says, "Tell me, Bob, how did I do this? How do I do this?" And it's a piece of string, and he changes it from one finger to the next, like very fast before the eye can see it. And I say, "So do it again." Okay, so you still do not know, no? I said, "No, I got no idea." He says,
Sure.
"Good. That is why I will beat you. You will lose because, now let's play." So he did all this one-upsmanship. I'd make a move and he'd say, "Not a bad move. Far better than I would expect from you."
He was just hilarious, man. Hilarious. Yeah. George was a real phenom, man. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, he would sit on the break in one band we were in. He'd go to the piano and play Bach and sound like he could be a concert pianist. He had that. And, he was, he was one of those phenomenal cats. And I think Niels Henning had the same type of gift, because they ultimately played the bass. I mean, they provided what the bass needed.
I
But
always say, if you're playing that bass to a bass player, I say, if you're playing that bass, remember, take away the B. You need that ass. The band needs to have some ass. Needs to have some bottom. You
the
got to have
bottom.
bottom on the band.
Yes.
Amen. To me, the solos are the frosting on the cake for a bass player. For me, as a drummer, you want to get it. You want to have, because a band is built from the bottom up. So if you got a good swing and rhythm section, and then you can. That's where it's at, man. And truth be told, the quickest way to change the sound of a band change the drums.
Oh yeah, that definitely changes the whole.
You know, we create the sonic environment for what's going on, what choices we make, what sonic choices we make, the feel we put on it, what kind of atmosphere we help to create. You know, we're trying to you know, appreciate what we can do in the space and respect the space.
Yes, I mean that's yeah, that whole atmosphere is up to you, and then we play off of that. And you know, the part I like with the drums too is the feeling of the give and take, not necessarily like in fours or eights or exchanges, but
No, but
Bobby Ward taught me,
conversational.
yeah, that there are times when I might be busy, and then the drummer knows not to get too busy there, or sometimes he'll be busy with you because that's the right moment to do that. Other times it's times for me to cool it and just play. I'll play time and let the drummer have it. You know, so there's that. Once you understand the game, how that works, you
It's
know,
got to be a balance. There has to be a balance.
yeah,
The
and
way things work out, and it's very important. And I think the only way you can develop that is on the bandstand and playing with people. You
yeah,
can't do it by yourself.
yeah, like it can't be done intellectually.
No.
You
And
know, you can't do it that
since
way.
the pandemic happened, everybody was home just practicing. So everybody now, I hear so many young musicians, they have so much ability, but they're like playing over instead of in.
Right. Well, you get along with these play-alongs. They serve a certain function, you know, to some extent if you want. But I used to tell my students, I'd say, well, you know, playing with these play-along records is sort of like making love to an inflatable doll. No matter how good you are, it's never going to respond to you.
Well, that's one way of putting it. Somebody else I knew put it another way, which is politically incorrect. It's like, you know, you can't make love by yourself.
Right. Yeah.
You need somebody else to do it with.
Or maybe I know some people that have a lot of deep feeling for themselves. Maybe they may differ with that. I know a few narcissists that that may say it's even better like that. I don't know.
I want to talk about me.
I want to talk about me.
I love me. Yeah.
All the things I
I
am.
always thought it's not about me. When I'm on the bandstand, I'm part of a team, and it's we. And I think of that acronym all the time. Together, everyone achieves more.
Yeah. Well, that's
When you have a great band, the sum is greater than the parts. And
yeah.
it's the balance of individuals and how they work together. And I always like, you know, everybody you play with has got a different sound. Everybody's got a different time feel. Everybody's got different ways of articulating. And you have to be aware of that, and you have to try to help them. That's what I try to do. And then certain people were going to play over, like you said, with Bobby. You know, that was a legendary guy. I'm glad you used him on those two records, man.
Oh, I'm glad you know those
Bobby
records.
Ward, man. Uh, is he still with us?
No, he passed about 2 years ago now. But
That's a Boston legend, man. People that don't know about him, legend.
yeah, he was a very unique drummer. I don't think I've ever met anybody played like that. You know, he sort of had his own. He was right between Elvin and Tony with his own thing, and you know, he was. I was fortunate because we played a lot together. We would just play duets, and we had a rapport that was. I was glad to have that relationship. You know,
Well,
with
I'm
him.
glad you doc. You know you've got documentation of him. There's not much.
Yeah, we're really happy about that. But back to your documentation. So I noticed Wikipedia, which I mean, we all should correct our Wikipedias because they don't have everything right. But they start your career because I looked you up, you know, and they start you in 1978 with Dave Liebman and John Scofield. So I thought they really should document you're a little earlier with Albert and even me, but that's how it goes. But
Yeah.
so I would say that's when your career was really starting. Starts with Albert and me, and then you met Liebman, and you got into that band with Hino and Dave and those kind of things. And you know, I mean, Dave is just I've just always just loved Dave as a human being, and
My mentors, it was great to play with somebody because he had played with my heroes. He played with Elvin, he played with Miles, he played with Chick. And Dave was also very giving and very astute, very smart. And we would record the gigs every night. We would record, we'd bring the Walkman, we'd record. Next day, going to the gig, he'd be listening to stuff and he'd be pointing things out to me. Why'd I do this? Why didn't I do that? And this was very good for me. And, being the youngster, I was open for getting reviewed
Yeah, well,
by a colleague, and it was great for me, man.
he was a natural teacher too.
Absolutely.
He's like
And
really.
what was great for me was when I got into that situation, I had a green light. A lot of times drummers are in bands and it's like, you got to be cool. You got to keep it down. You got to do this. You got to do that, But Dave, he wanted the hit. So I was able to go for it. And he wanted that. And that was great for me because it gave me a chance to get that thing and that, ferocity and that intensity. And then what I needed to do was figure out how to get all that, but bring it down in here, but still have that thing,
Right. Well,
And
that's the thing that you could do that I noticed was unusual also especially for a young drummer at that time. The and most drummers still can't do it. Can I learned that with Chet Baker too, that somebody could play quietly but keep the intensity
yeah,
that you would have when you're loud. I tell people prime example of that is Kluk, Kenny Clark, when I got to do one little tour with him, which totally changed my life. But one thing I tell them is listen to Miles' record of Solar, where he's just playing the brushes on a snare drum throughout the whole, and he plays so many levels of intensity with just brushes on a snare drum that that's like such a wonderful lesson for drummers.
absolutely. I mean, Kluk was magic, man. These cats were magicians. And it takes time to figure that out. I mean, I hear my early recordings when the music got more intense, I'd rush. Then when it would get quiet, I'd drag. So then you had to figure out, okay, as it gets more intense, you got to stay relaxed. As it gets more quiet, you got to stay more focused. And there's these things, that yin yang thing. I mean, I want to be intense, but I can't get tense. I want to be exciting. I can't get excited.
That's a funny line. One night, I was hearing this trumpet player, and he had a tendency to overindulge and get very where he would not relax at all. And a friend of mine said he was listening to him. He said, there are cats that play exciting. This guy plays excited. and,
Or I kind of say if guys, peek out their solo too fast and they empty their pockets, I go, they've just had a case of premature articulation.
Premature articulation. Right. So, but back to we're talking about Adam Nussbaum's wonderful experiences in music. And, so after Dave Liebman and also your first experiences with Scofield, I think, in that context.
Well, I played with Dave's quintet, and at the same time, I was involved in a quartet with John. And my first European tour was with John Scofield in the fall of '78. And that was another great situation for me because Hal Galper was on the band and Stafford James. And these were both, I was once again the rookie. And Hal was good too, man, because he would like, he kicked my butt big time. And that was just great experiences for me.
Yeah, Hal will tell you what he thinks. There's nothing shy about Hal.
Absolutely. And I was just grateful to have that. And so we did that for we did 2 tours with Quartet with Scofield, did a few tours with Liebman. And then we started a trio with Swallow and Scofield and myself.
Oh,
And
I love
that was for me just great. And we really had a wonderful time together. Swallow is one of my favorite people on this earth, a great human being, incredible bass player, great composer, and just one of my heroes. And that was so great playing with him. And we did that for several years. And that was another, that's one of the bands I'm proud of. I think we, as a group, made some very good music together.
Yeah, I heard some of that band, and that was really great. You all sounded fantastic,
Yeah, it
and
was
you
treat
know,
for me.
I remember who was the bass player. I was just thinking with the
Swallow.
right. No, I know that one, but I was thinking with the group with Hal Galper was Swallow. No, who was the
With
bass
Hal
player?
Galper, we did one tour with Stafford James, and then
Right,
we did another tour, and it was Wayne Dockery.
right. See, those guys were prominent on the scene in those days. Stafford was in a couple of bands of mine too. You know, when I
Right.
did my Sweet Basil gig, he would sometimes do it, and he was often with Woody Shaw at that time too.
Yeah. And
And
he played with Gary Bartz. He did a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
and when I saw him was a long time ago, maybe 30 years in Paris. He had moved to
He lives
Paris.
there, I believe.
And what was that?
I believe he lives there now.
He still lives there.
Yeah.
Yeah, he kind of we didn't hear about him too much anymore.
Yeah, I think he got involved more with classical music and things like that. And I remember hearing him in the band with when Lewis Hayes and Junior Cook had that quintet together with Woody Shaw and Ronnie Matthews. They used to play around town,
That's
which
right. Yeah, he was in that too.
right.
Anyway, that was wonderful. John Scofield and I actually went back to when he was taking a summer course at Berkeley in I think it was around 1960, 69, 68. And I had a friend who had a bookstore, and he was a big fan of Lee Konitz and stuff, and he liked my playing, and he said, "Why don't you come in on Saturdays to the bookstore, and if you can get a guitar player and play duets, you can put the guitar case out. If people buy books, they got some change in their pockets. They'll throw some tips in, and I'll give you guys $10, $5 each to just come in as an initiative to come in." So I had to find a guitar player. I went over to Berkeley, and I listened to different practice rooms outside, and I'd hear cats practicing with guitar players, and I'd knock on the door and say, "Would you like to play a tune together, a duet or something?" So I did that with a couple of cats, and they said, "Well, I'd like to do your bookstore thing, but I'm too busy studying," which always was funny. I've got too much homework to go and do this. I'd say, "Oh, well, okay, sorry." And then finally I heard this other guy, and he was sitting there trying to play All the Things You Are and not sounding half bad. He was learning it and he was doing that. So I knocked on his door and we started to play, and we played for about an hour and a half. And I said, "I got this thing in a bookstore." And he was like, "Where is it? When is it? Let's do it." And that was Skull. It turned out to be him. So we did this, and we did it for about the next three weeks, 4 weeks, maybe a whole month. And then he went back to Connecticut, because I think he was just finishing high school. But we made enough money to actually hire a bass player, and we did that. And John later told me that was his first actual situation where he got to play jazz.
Well, Schofield and I grew up in adjacent towns in Connecticut.
Norwalk
I
and
grew up in Norwalk and he grew up in Wilton. They were next to each other. And John was 4 years older than me. And when I was in a band when I was 13 with my friend Brian McHale was taking guitar lessons at the local shop with Sco.
Ah,
And Sco was in a band called the Skylarks. Now, when you're 13 and somebody's 17, that's a big age difference.
yes, at that point.
And then when I moved into New York in 75, I lived down the street from Slagle and Lovano and Dennis and Billy Drews and Keith O'Quinn and Steve Slagle. They'd all had a loft.
Wasn't that on 23rd Street? Wasn't that the old Vanguard?
Lovano was on 23rd Street, but on 128 West 26th Street was down this. That's where my loft was. Down the street was where there was this other loft, and I'd go there and jam, and that's where Sco and I got reacquainted.
Yeah, because
That's
I
how
would
it
go there and hang
started.
out too and play.
But yeah, they used to have that nice loft up there. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember I had a fire in my apartment building once, and I had to be out of it while they renovated the place because there was a. So I had 2 months on the street until they got it fixed. Well, about 6 weeks. So I stayed with Claudio Roditi for a little while, and then I ended up often staying at one of those two lofts. So I remember we played all the time. It was a constant influx and outflux of musicians
I
just
mean,
blowing
this
all
was
the time.
great. This was great. It's because we were playing a lot, man. Playing all the time.
Yeah, there was a lot of that going on. So then you joined Stan Getz.
Well, Stan came along in 83. I did Stan for a while, and that was a great education. I mean, Stan was probably the greatest natural musician that I'd ever been around. He didn't know anything about theory, but he had ears like Dumbo.
Yeah,
And he had everything. Phenomenal sound, amazing time, great line. I mean, just he was one of those freaks. He was a real natural freak. He's one of those people where the music was easy, life not so easy.
life was not easy for Stan, no, but Stan was like Chet in the sense that they asked Mulligan about Chet, and Mulligan's famous quote is that Chet knows everything about changes except their names, everything about chords except their names.
Yeah, they heard everything. These guys could hear paint dry on different planets.
Ira Sullivan too was another one of those.
Yeah. Chet, Stan, Ira, these guys, they just were natural. They had a gift. They really had a gift. And I just wish Stan was around now that I can play a little better.
And he was on his way to working on his difficult personality toward the last few years. He had quit drinking and seemed to be on his way to he could be so beautiful when he was in a certain mood, and then he could turn on a dime and become something.
What did they say? He's a nice bunch of guys.
That's what Zoot said. Yeah,
The
Stanley is
other
a nice
one,
bunch of
what
guys.
Stan wants, Stan gets.
Yeah, he was he was like that. So that must have been an interesting. I mean, who else was on the band? Was
Well,
Mraz
it
or
was,
George or
uh,
Cooper on it?
it varied initially when I got on it. There is one video of us playing at the White House on YouTube
Ah,
from 1983. It was Jim McNeely initially and Mark Johnson, and then Mark was out of it, and then Dennis was in the band for a minute, and then I did some gigs, and Albert did some gigs, Mike Formanek, George Mraz, rotating stock. Yeah, I was in and out of the band for about 2 years, in and out, sliding around. And also during that time, I was fortunate where I got connected with Gil Evans.
oh, tell me about that. That must have been.
Well, Gil was just such a phenomenal musician and just a great spirit. And we had a Monday night at Sweet Basil. We did that in 7th Avenue South. We do Mondays. We did a few tours. We did some stuff around the States. We went to Europe. We went to Japan. And just being around Gil was incredible. And the band was an incredible balance of just odd characters that somehow, when you had the right combination of guys, it could be really fantastic. And that band was, some nights were wonderful and other nights were just like, huh? But it was a lot of fun. I mean, I was living right behind Sweet Basil. I was living on Grove Street.
Okay,
I
of
don't know if you remember the Pink Teacup, that restaurant.
course.
I lived 2 doors down from there. So
Pancakes and chicken and waffles.
that's it, baby. You know, so Soul Food City right there. So what was great about that gig is I could just, leave for the gig a minute before the gig and I'd be early.
Yeah, well, I lived on Leroy Street when I worked at Sweet Basil, and Dwayne and Blaze, who owned the place at the time, the first owners,
Yeah.
they would laugh at me because they'd say I'd get to practicing, and I was so excited about playing with all these wonderful rhythm sections that I wanted to be ready. So I'd start blowing in my apartment and start practicing. I get fascinated with something I was practicing, and then I realized, oh damn, I better get to the gig because it was like 5 minutes just before the gig, and I'd run in like maybe 5 minutes late, and they'd say, how can you possibly live 5 minutes from a place and still manage to be late? And that was
I
young
did
me.
the same thing when I was going to junior high school. I literally lived just down the street and around the corner from my junior high school. When it came time to graduate, I think I had like 100 late detentions. They wouldn't let me graduate. I had to go there after school finished for like 2 days and sit in the cafeteria.
That's
And they said,
funny.
how can you be late? You live so close.
Well, then,
Same
if
thing.
they could have done that to me at Sweet Basil, they probably would have. I mean, that I'd be, but
I wonder what happened to those guys actually.
Dwayne died. Um, he got ill, and that's a long time ago. But he had like a kind of, I mean, cancer or something related like that.
I wonder what happened to Blaze, because after that there was Fat Tuesdays and Lush Life.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there were some, um, well, all kinds of rumors circulated. I don't know
We
what
never
really
know.
happened. So
Right.
but there was a lot of cocaine running around in those days. That was
Well, not just that. So
There was that, and there was a certain element that was always present, and he may have gotten caught up in that. I don't know, but
well, they always treated me nice, and I always had only good things to say about these cats. And they gave me a place to work, and they gave me a chance. So,
yeah, I feel the same way. They really, they really helped me. I mean, Dwayne actually called the New Yorker and made sure that people came in to review me, and a lot of whatever early reputation I had was, Dwayne was and then he had that club for a while, the Whippoorwill. I think he did that for a while, and then he had a couple of ventures that didn't really make it,
yeah,
and
it was interesting. It was a great time to be in town, man. It was a great time. And the Breckers had their club down the street.
Seventh
There
Avenue South.
was Infirmary. There was so much just on that strip, the Vanguard, Basil, 7th Avenue, and
South.
just to live in that neighborhood was fantastic. I
And
remember
boomers, don't forget
and
boomers.
Boomers, right?
Yeah,
I could push my drums from one gig to the other just down the street. I mean, come on.
I had a gig. There was that Spanish Mexican restaurant on 7th Avenue South too, that sometimes had jazz. And I remember playing at 7th Avenue South with Chet, and then being hired by Duke Jordan to play in a trio with him and Wilbur Little at this Mexican restaurant where they had like an electric piano and Duke was on electric piano. And I would go from one. I played one night. I played the set at St. James Infirmary with Chet, which was Hot O'Brien's club, and then not even put my horn in the case, but just keep it around my neck, finish the set, and walk about 2 blocks to this Mexican place and play a set.
I remember the joint was on the corner of Bleecker. It was on the southeast corner.
Right, it was like a little south of Bleecker. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember I said to myself, now this is New York. I would not even put my horn away, just keep it around my neck and leave one gig, go to the next, play the set there, play the next set with Chet. And I did that for a couple of nights. That was so much fun.
I also remember after hours joints that would open up like at 4:35 in the morning.
Oh, yes. There was Joyce's House of Unity. You were there. We would play there. We would see each other there. And Junior Cook and I were hanging out a lot together.
All the time.
Right? Yep. Junior and I were like, a team. We would hang out. He'd pick me up my gig. I'd pick him up at his gig, and we'd go off to the after hours club together.
Because I remember most clubs would close at 2. Then you go to Bradley's. Bradley's would close around 3. And then sometimes the hang would start at Bradley's. But then, they'd close the door and the hang would happen. But then you could leave Bradley's. You'd go get something to eat. Then you'd go up to Joyce's.
Right.
And Joyce's would open like at 5. 4:30 or 5. And I remember I was going to City College at the time, and I would go to sleep early, wake up like at 4, have some breakfast, go to Joyce's, and then after Joyce's, I would go to band at City College. And I used to think in my head, looking back at it, what was my real school?
Yeah, right. What was your real school?
I had the yin and yang back to back. And Joyce's was far out, man. I remember the vestibule before they let you in.
They check you for weapons.
If you were carrying, if you were holding a knife or a gun, they had a brother there who was like the size of the Hindenburg. You had to leave it with him. I remember that clear as a bell, man. And it was so great. I mean, Freddie Hubbard was up there. I mean, I think George Benson, so many kids, George Coleman.
Woody liked to come by, Woody Shaw. One night I was on the bandstand there with George Coleman, Jr., and Clifford Jordan.
Right.
And me, 4 saxophone players. Ray Bryant was playing electric piano.
Woo!
You know what I mean? Eddie Moore, Big Eddie, was playing drums.
Loved him.
And Louis Ware, who was the guy who ran the session.
Right, Louis Ware, the tenor player.
Trumpet player, actually. He was
trumpet?
Yeah, because I remember that Louis he had wonderful ideas, and I always felt he should have played saxophone because he didn't have the trumpet chops to carry his ideas through. So I kind of remembered that about Louis.
There was another guy.
David Ware was a tenor player.
No, but there was another guy, Louis Keel, I think, or somebody who played tenor. That's who I'm trying to think of who was up there sometimes.
It could have been, because a lot of cats come up, but I just remember trying to stay alive amidst those guys all scalping you, and, just the music was wonderful. And
George Coleman, man, he's still with us.
He is. In fact, we did a show of George. We did a very nice On the Real Side with George.
Great.
A little while back. And, he was out of the scene for quite a few years. And then all of a sudden he rose like a phoenix. And he's
amen.
He's all over the place, as is Charles McPherson these days. So, that's great that these cats are still out there, because Gary Bartz is still going strong too.
Yeah, I was so grateful to, I spent almost 15 years working with Moody, and, getting to play with him, all the cats from that generation would come and play and hang out. Frank West, Jimmy Heath, and it was just like the hang was so great just to hear the stories.
Oh man, I know. Moody was so generous too.
Oh,
he was
really like an angel.
Yeah, he told me once, we were talking, And he said, you know, Bob, I may not be an innovator. I may not, I'm not like Coltrane or Sonny or these people or, you know, he said, but one thing I do know is I play James Moody better than anybody else in the world, better than anybody in the world. And that was when I was a teenager. He said, you know, so first of all, aspire to that and then let the world take it where it does. But you just sit there, you try to play Bob Mover better than anybody in the world, and the world will reward you.
You just try to be the best you can be, you know? Everything comes in here. The stuff we like stays and affects us. The stuff we don't like also affects us as far as what we don't want to do.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a whole process, man. It's a whole process. But what was wonderful about being around somebody like Moody was that he was always maintaining his curiosity and his hunger, because he knew I had played with Liebman and, you know, Bob Berg and Mike Brecker, and he was, and Bergonzi, he was always shedding all this stuff.
Oh yeah, he liked those patterns and stuff.
He
You know,
liked working on stuff, man. He was very diligent and maintained a real routine of working on stuff. And if he heard a young guy play some stuff, he'd go, hey man, show me that. And to be around a master who had that wisdom and that depth of experience, but was still looking, was so inspiring to be around.
oh, it was absolutely. You know, I mean, I remember first time I sat in with him, Turk Morrow heard me at this little one of my first gigs up, you know, and I was like only 16, and Morrow Turk took me down. He says you got to meet, and it's the first time I was ever actually in the half note. Turk brought me to the half note and said, I want somebody to hear you, and it was Moody, and he said, come on, you're going to play with James Moody. I said, no, I'm not. No way you're going to get, you know, I don't want to do that. I mean, you know, and then he convinced me to come up and play, and I played with Moody. We got off the bandstand. He said, man, there were a couple of things you played there I really enjoyed that you did intervallically. You know, what was that? And I'm saying, I can't believe James Moody's asking me what I'm playing, but that's true. That's how he was.
He,
And
he was he was such a just an angel. You know, some people on this world just transcend all the bullshit, and he was just you know, I was so grateful I had time with him. Actually, we went to Japan. This was a far out story. um Indubitably I would get a tour around Thanksgiving, so I'd be away. So when my son was, I think, around 10 or something, he said, hey mom, you know, dad, he's always gone on Thanksgiving, it would really be nice if he's home. So my wife said to me, okay baby, this is what's happening. You know, you're staying home this Thanksgiving. Of course, the next day I get a call to go to Japan with Moody. And so I'm thinking, oh shit, what am I going to do? And my wife says, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to bring Zach to Japan with you.
ah,
So we called up the school and we said, listen, we're going to be taking Zach out of school a week before the vacation. And they said, well, we don't like that. And my wife said, he's going to go to Japan with his father. And they said, fantastic.
right, of course.
And for him, it was a life-changing experience, my son. And being with Moody and Rini and Todd Coolman, everybody was such a groove. Moody's wife, Linda, was on the tour. It was incredible for my son because, first of all, it's, I think, always great for people that look the way we do to go somewhere where we're the other person.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Where we are the minority. And it was just life changing for him. It opened up his perception. And when he had to write a whole, you know, dissertation. He had to write something for college, and he talked about that experience. And it was great, because he had a full head of red hair, and he's walking. It was such a great experience, and they were also giving and sweet to him.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful, man. That's yeah. I also did that with my daughter when I'd go on tour in the summer in Italy. We'd rent a little villa down in the south in a little town, a fishing village called Molfetta near Bari. And then wherever I had to go, I'd take her on the gig with me. We'd grab the train and go to wherever the gigs were, and then come back. I'd rent a little electric piano, so she had a piano to practice on. And I brought my friend Tony Castellano, who was playing piano on the tours,
Yeah.
on the tour with me. And she got to be around the musicians and also in a different environment. It'd be around Italy and learn how to play Scala Quarante, card games and have some fun. Nobody has fun like the Italians.
And listen, man, when we stop and think about stuff that's affected our life, it's never things, it's events.
Yeah.
You don't remember, oh, I got this thing. You remember an event, something that you were part of, something that touched your life. I mean, and this is where I just have so much gratitude for so many great experiences, man. I mean, the music has taken me all around the world. I've been everywhere, most places. There's a few places I haven't been. I was out in Queens the other day to a neighborhood I was never in before.
Yeah, that's right.
Meantime, I've been to Cologne or Tokyo, hundreds of times.
Well, I've been almost everywhere in Germany, Italy, this and that, but I've never been to Iowa.
Yeah, right. I don't know what I owe, but I don't Iowa.
Iowa, no, I don't want. But I mean, there's several places in America that I never really got to. So I want to go through a few of these other people that you played with because we got great stories about all of them. This will definitely be a two-parter, if you don't mind. We got.
I may have to jump in about 10 minutes, so we could then do another part.
We can do another. That would be great.
Yeah.
Even maybe you were thinking of next week we'll do the same thing and do another hour. Because you got such wonderful stories and such a
man, it can just keep on going with all this stuff, and it's pretty far out, man. It's very interesting to be at this time in my life, because truth be told, I feel like I'm starting to understand it.
Yeah, that happens at around this age. I think we have enough objectivity on our lives to see it as in a realistic, like real reality. And I think at this point there's less self-involvement. There's less. You don't have anything to prove anymore.
Absolutely.
I think there's that when we finally feel we don't. Mingus told me once I had a falling out like with him, and I mean it wasn't good. But one of the last times I saw him, we were at Bradley's, and Jimmy Rainey was playing, and Mingus was there with Sue, and he had actually been there earlier. Paul Desmond and Mingus were very close friends, which people don't realize, but they both had a great interest in foreign films together, and visual art, and they shared a lot. I don't think they ever played a note together, but you know what I mean. There was much more to that than that. But to make a long story short, Mingus went out to get a cab, go home, and I had known that he wasn't doing too well. I had run into him a little bit before, but we really weren't talking too much together because it was an unpleasant parting.
He could be a volatile personality.
Yeah, and we'd had some moments like that. But I did want to tell him something. So I went outside in the rain, and I'm half drunk, and I just want to tell him something as he's waiting for his cab. I said, Charles, I just want to tell you that, however we ended up with this and that, and whatever disagreements we had, I'm a lot stronger because I had this experience of working with you. I just want you to know that I'm always grateful for, even for better or worse, right? You taught me a lot and I learned a lot and I'm much stronger because of you. So I just want to thank you for that. He said, well, I've been hearing some, and I'd always thought it was his fault that he was nasty and he picked on me and he was erratic and he was blah, 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 and he was this and that. So I hadn't blamed myself for too much. I said, I laid it all on him. But he said something that put it right in perspective because I was only 20, 21 when I worked with him. He said, well, I hear a lot of good things about you too. He said, I hear that you don't got so much to prove no more. And then
The whole thing is figuring out how to relax and be focused. And the thing that I try to be always aware of is when I'm playing, I don't want to think. I just want to pay attention.
yeah.
Because, once you start thinking, you're getting in the way of the things that are coming in. And at this point,
Consciousness, yeah.
you just want to be unconsciously reacting and dealing with what's happening. And, you may make nanosecond adjustments to thing where you might have to do it, but you got to be paying attention all the time. And this is something that I notice now that people don't do so much. Everybody's caught up on the device. People are driving, they're holding the phone. I mean, come on, man. Pay attention to what's going on in the moment. This has got to be something that's important. Oh, here's a great picture. It just came down.
Oh, wait, this is Max.
That's Keystone Corner. That's Max Roach and Elvin.
Oh, wow.
Both bands, Todd had booked both bands. And it was that I love that picture because there
Wow,
was,
great picture.
woo, that's got a lot of energy in that picture.
Could have heard that,
Woo. Well, Todd had recordings of all these things, man.
Oh, I'm sure he does. He's a great archivist. He's got all.
Yeah. I hope more stuff will just come out at some point if it can,
Yeah, well, but that paying attention thing is it's very important. And I have young children as well. I have a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old, as well as I have my older daughter who's she I don't know if she wants me to say her age, but she's considerably older and born in the 80s. And then I have my little ones. And man, my 17-year-old, I just got to get her off that phone sometimes. It's always, smoking in our generation, smoking was something, and of course it gave me emphysema. So I'm definitely not an advocate of that. But one thing, I smoked so I could pay better attention. I thought sometimes I would be listening or concentrating, and the cigarette will kind of help me pay it. I didn't do something to give my attention away or divide my attention. And in some way, these cell phones and this social media and all this stuff are distractions from actually being there. And
the thing that I think had such an impact on me was growing up and we didn't have social media. We didn't have any of that. The things that had the most impact on me were direct contact. Being in the room, being at the Vanguard, being in the room, being at Boomers, hearing people live, being in the room, meeting somebody live, not a record, not a book, not a video, but I mean, and that stuff impacts your entire being. And I know that now it's not what it used to be. We're really in a transitional time. I don't know what it's going to be. I've always found that, people don't hear what you say, they see what you do. Actions speak louder than words. And you got to deliver, you got to take care of business, I see a lot of people now, they talk the talk, but they're not walking the walk. And
Yeah.
sometimes I want to say to some people, it's like, wait a minute, who do you think you are?
Who do you think you are?
You know, proof is in the pudding. Can you deliver? Like somebody said to me, how do you get gigs? I say, have a gig and do a good job. Now, with the whole social media thing, people will say, well, how many hits do you have on YouTube? The whole thing is, the whole template has shifted. And I don't know what it's going to be. I didn't grow up that way. You didn't grow up that way.
No, we didn't.
It's something different, and I don't know what it's going to be. But what I'd say is, I got it cut out, so we should definitely think about phase two.
Phase two, we'll talk about people like Abercrombie and Brecker and Paul Bley and Jocko and all the people the friends we've shared and your experiences.
Well, man, I'll tell you, Bob, I'm grateful for the you know had the patience to put up with my young ass and
Oh,
gave me the opportunity to play with some great people. I wanted to ask you, where's Masuo now?
Masuo lives part of the year in Japan and part of the year in Hawaii. And he's
It's a
very,
tough life for him.
he still calls me up. You know, he and Shirley, I still hear from them every few months. We have a nice little talk on the phone. And
Is he playing at all?
oh, yeah. Yeah, he's playing in Japan. He does tours. Yeah, he's actually, he
I'd
looks
love to
great.
reconnect with him, man. I thought he was a wonderful guitar player.
Yeah, he was a very special kind of player. Once again, he was a guy who played for the music. He didn't play to show off, and that was, years ago, I recommended him to Sonny Rollins. Sonny was looking for a guitar player.
I think you did a very nice job, Bob. I think Theodore was very happy.
Well, I certainly hope so.
Well, come on, I mean, we just try to do the best we can. I mean, wow.
Did you get a chance to play with Sonny ever?
I was Al Foster recommended me. I think I was 21 or something, man. I was well, let's put it this way. I could not believe I was so like I couldn't believe it's like I'm playing with God or something, you know what I mean? I can't believe it. And there's another one, but Sonny was very cool. I did a week, I rehearsed with him for like 2 weeks, and then this is a whole other story. But then a few months later, he called me, and I ended up doing a weekend. And it was, I was such a rookie. But wow, but I had some conversations with Sonny during the pandemic a few times because these people in Denmark wanted to give him an award. They didn't know how to get in touch with him, and so I was able to talk with Sonny, and it was very sweet, man. I mean, God bless him. He's a one in a row. And the book that Aidan Levy wrote about him, Saxophone Colossus, is very good.
Yeah, it is. I'm in it actually too. They got me.
Well,
How I met
I
Sonny.
knew the guy was doing research because I'm in it. And I said, oh my God, he
Yeah,
can't hide.
I thought I saw your name in it too.
I couldn't believe it. But I mean, I mean, God bless him. God bless Haynes. These cats are still out there. Benny Golson. I mean, wow.
Yep, they are. And the next time, let's make an appointment. Even a week from today is good for me.
Yeah, let me check my scene, and I'll text you.
Okay, that sounds good. This has been such a pleasure to talk to the great Adam Nussbaum today.
Grape, not great.
Grape, the grape, the tender grape. Uh, the well, how would they? I've seen that the grape described different ways, but anyway, it's been wonderful. And, just reminiscing and catching up and seeing how Adam felt about a lot of things and wonderful experience in life and music, of course, which is the same. And we're going to continue this. Definitely, we'll have a part two because there's so many people we didn't even get to in Adam's vast
Thank you
experience.
for thinking of me, and I appreciate it. And thank you. All right, team. We'll figure out
Thank
something
you.
hopefully next week.
That would be great.
All
And
right.
thank you everybody. And as I have to say, social media wise, if you enjoy this, give us a like. See, now we're in into the new world.
Thank you out there in cyber world. Those of you on the interweb, we like this.
That's good. Thank you, and we'll keep that
Aloha.
for motion.
All right. Over and out. Take care. Thank you, Bob.
Bye. Thank you, Adam. God bless.